This is Jim Cornette, pro wrestling legend and administrator of JimCornette.com and the Jim Cornette Experience on MLW every week, and you are listening to the Undisputed Wrestling Show and Angry Barks and all these people that are asking me all these questions that I'm answering with forthrightness and honesty.
One of my first remembrances of an invasion was when the original Midnight Express with Dennis and Randy Rhodes came out of the crowd to attack the Sweet Stan and Bobby. Tell us a little bit about that. What's your memories of them going against each other?
Well, it was great. Everybody remembers it. Of course, it was the greatest thing that we ever did that didn't draw any money because they fucked it up pretty much as soon as we did it. That was at the time where Turner Broadcasting had just purchased Jim Crockett Promotions, and so Dusty was the booker for the first month of the program. Then when Turner Broadcasting fired him because they got mad at him for doing an angle with Road Wars on TV where there's too much blood and a spike in the eye and everything, then Jim Crockett was the booker for a month. And then they hired George Scott from, beyond the grave, who had been suffering, I guess, from advanced Alzheimer's for the past 10 years because he, I've heard so much about how great a booker George Scott was. He was a complete blithering idiot. We actually quit. Gave our notice and we're going to finish up with WCW with George Scott as booker, and son of a gun, they fired him before we worked out our notice. So we came back and he was gone. But the original angle was memorable, and it was at a point where we had just been wrestling against Tully Blanchard and Arn Anderson for the NWA World Tag Team Championship, and we had beaten them in Philadelphia for the tag team title when Tully and Arn gave their notice and we're going to the WWF. And the matches were not only great, because when you have two tag teams of that level in there, the matches are going to be great, but also myself and J.J. Dillon got a chance to promo against each other, and J.J.'s promos are great, so we had a lot of fun with that. It was great coming up with, with material. I'd sit in the car and think, how can I zing him? How can I zing him? And also the gates, the gates were strong. We were making more money on payoffs wrestling Tully Blanchard and Arn Anderson a couple of times a week than we later did on contract with WCW because the houses were doing so well. But unfortunately, the sale was already in motion because Crockett started drawing so much money with Flair and Luger and their rematches on top, and us and Tully and Arn for the World Tag Title, that the rest of the family members, David and Jackie and Francis, everybody said, well, let's not sell. I mean, we did $140,000 in Richmond, Virginia, sold out. We did big houses in Philadelphia and Baltimore, etc. Anyway, they left. We had the World Tag Title, but now we were put in position of being somewhat baby faces. And at that point, they wanted to turn the Road Warriors heel, so they turned them heel on the Midnight Express in New Orleans, which was the scene of some of our greatest triumphs, and that further cemented us as baby faces. So we were in the position of being baby faces with nobody to wrestle, and a top team with nobody to wrestle. So I knew that Paul E. had been managing Dennis Condrey and Randy Rhodes, who were the original Midnight Express in Alabama in 1981. He had been managing them for Vern Gagne in the AWA, so I knew that at the same time they were anxious to get on big-time television, because the AWA show at the time, you might remember if you're old enough, was on ESPN, I think at like 4 o'clock in the afternoon on a weekday.
I'm old enough.
And it was pretty dreary at that point, because Vern had not really, come along with the times. But anyway, so I came up with the idea of what they would do, and called Paul E., who we had communication at the time back in those days, to make sure that they were up for it, and they were. And then I pitched it to Dusty, and he was somewhat reticent about bringing Dennis back because Dennis had left and flown the coop, about a year and a half before that. But I said, hey, we need somebody to work with. Dennis is on board with this. Everybody's cool. Let's do it. So he did it. And the only thing that he changed was I thought it would be great if I got the phone call and then suddenly they erupted in the studio and they beat up all three of us, left all three of us laying bloody. And Dusty changed it. He said, if you're going to bleed, then don't worry about the boy bleeding, because they've seen Bobby bleeding, they've seen Stan bleeding, they've never seen you bleed. Just leave it on you. And that's the only thing he changed about my original idea. And it worked, and it made an impact. And then Paul's promos, I told him one time, I said, you could turn Attila the Hun babyface. Nobody likes you. It's like they all know you personally. And it was a situation where we were pricks, but, you know, at the same time, we were the home team pricks, whereas these guys were invaders, and Paulie was from New York, and nobody likes anybody from fucking New York. And so it worked, but we were derailed by the Turner Broadcasting, you know, takeover of WCW. First, they didn't want to send the managers on the road to try to save money, and so much of the attention was on us, and then Jim Crockett didn't like Randy Rose's work and booked a loser leave town match so Dennis could get a new partner, but then George Scott came in and he didn't like us and he'd rather keep the other guys because they were cheaper. And that's when Dennis Condrey again said, you know, this whole thing is fucking rapidly imploding. And so he stayed in Denver and didn't come for the pay-per-view match, which was supposed to be the loser leave town and break the team up, because why would he? And so the whole thing fell to shit. But everybody remembers it greatly. It had tremendous potential and was kiboshed by the office politics.